Welcome to Debunque, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on misinformation, injustice, and power, wherever it hides. I'm your host, Andrea Houston. Throughout his career, Richard Lasimbo has been at the forefront of fighting violence, stigma, and discrimination against LGBTQ+ people. His work sits at the intersection of courage, resilience, and resistance. Richard is the Director General of the Uganda Key Populations Consortium, advocacy organization defending the rights of LGBTQ+ people, people living with HIV, and other marginalized groups in one of the most hostile environments on the planet. Uganda made headlines in 2023 when it passed one of the most brutal anti-LGBTQ laws in the world. It criminalized identity itself, escalating decades of state-sponsored homophobia. And now, as global far-right movements gain strength, and with the Trump-aligned movement slashing global health funding, advocates like Richard are facing a perfect storm. What does it mean to fight for human rights in the face of state violence and shrinking international solidarity? And what can we learn from the front lines of this struggle? Richard, welcome to Debunque.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and I'm really honored to be here, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Thank you so much.
Let's start from the beginning. Tell me a bit about your story and what led you to this work, to be a human rights defender in Uganda.
From my high school days, even in primary school, I have always strived for justice and always wanted to see something positive in the lives of others. And into my university days, and if someone asked me if while growing up, I thought of being an activist, I don't think I would have said yes, because for me, this came really naturally just after university. And then it was at a time when lots of things were happening. In 2011 is when I volunteered to work at Sexual Minorities Uganda. And it was a moment of convening conference around health. And it was my very first time to really meet as many members of the community in one space. And from that point, I really felt like I needed to contribute something, and just understanding the difficulty it was at a time for being LGBT and at worst being known. So that's how I pick up my pieces. But also, I started to work officially an employee in 2012 at Sexual Minorities Uganda SMAG as a research assistant, and lots of things took a huge turn. I was working in the sidelines. I wasn't at the forefront, and I felt like it was safe for me. That same year, like in 2013, that year, they started, there was this Facebook pages that would out people. They'll put your photo on Facebook, and then they put your address and all sorts of things. I found myself there. I was able to brush up easily then. And then boom, there was this meeting which was raided by police then, by the late Minister of Ethics and Integrity. And then we took the case to court. And there I was at court, and then there was media, and it was 1:00 news. There was my face, and the headline was "Homosexual Swing, the Minister of Ethics and Integrity." And that started spark a whole conversation. People asking me, how do you know these people? And of course, I was in the closet, and so I was trying to brush it off. I was doing my research, I think for me, the turning point was when the law was passed in 2013. And in 2014, I woke up one morning and my face was on the cover page of a tabloid. And the hate that I received, the fear that I lived with, to the point that I had to take leave and stay away from work, stay away from the country, to just have the dust settle. That was like a turning point for me. It's something I had never planned or prepared for, but also just having your truth all out there before you are able to tell your own story was very scary. It was a very tough moment, I remember. But I think for me, one thing that really gave me the courage and why I continue to do the work that I do today was that in that very moment of vulnerability, I had a strength through my colleagues, my friends. I had a very huge support system that really stood by me. my family turned around and quickly to really be there for me by my friends. That was a very huge turning point for me, which is not always the case for many Ugandans and many Africans around the continent. So I was really lucky. But I think also the most important thing that actually gives me the courage to do the work I do today is the fact that the messages of encouragement, beyond the hateful messages I received at that time, but the messages that I received that were encouraging were just people saying, "Oh, thank you so much for the work you're doing. We're so glad to know that there's someone like us somewhere." And I think for me, that was a turning point. I don't do what I do because um, someone else is telling me to do it, but I do it because I know that the work that we do is life-saving, but also it's life-turning. But also, most importantly, it gives us an opportunity to have a dialogue of who we are. Again, in a very long story, this is why I do what I do, but also this is where I get my courage. I get it from my community because behind me, I am a face for the invisible, but also behind me, I am a voice for those who actually speak through me, and that's my community.
As you spoke, you bring back so many memories of watching that era, that, the first Kill the Gays bill as it came to be known in the media, and it came to be known in headlines. Because at the time the death penalty was attached to it, eventually got removed from that iteration. Of course, it's been reapplied to the 2023 bill. But as you spoke, those incredible ups and downs, seeing the joyous moment of Uganda Pride celebrations, and then seeing activists like yourself take their fight to court. And unfortunately, it wasn't able to have the outcome that you all wanted. But that energy, that collective organizing, that activism, I think really inspired the world in many ways. It certainly put the spotlight on Uganda in a really important way. And in effect, probably put the spotlight on all of the global South, on anti-LGBTQ laws throughout the global South. As you just explained so eloquently, we know Uganda has been a hostile place for LGBTQ people for many years. The most recent bill that passed in 2023 really took this hostility and hatred to another level. You are quoted as saying, "Being human is now a crime in Uganda," which I think is such a powerful quote. It really crystallizes, what this bill actually is: the criminalization of dignity, the criminalization of humanity. How is this law reshaping the daily lives of LGBTQ people, sex workers, HIV plus people on a daily basis in Uganda right now?
So, as a country, we find ourselves with the Anti-Homosexuality Act, or Law 2.0, because the first one was passed in 2013. And of course, we, through the legal systems in the courts of law, we're able to have that nullified. But 10 years later, or a decade later, more or less, we had another law again passing in Parliament, and now it's actually law. We fought it. We've been in the Constitutional Court. We got some gains around access to health, right to privacy, and housing. But of course, much of the law still remains. And right now, we're in the Supreme Court, and we are hoping that the Supreme Court will live to its promise of ensuring that all Ugandans get the much needed dignity as are put in the Constitution, as said and mentioned in our Constitution. So having the law again makes it very difficult for the community in terms of living their lives freely. We have seen and we have documented cases of human rights violations against LGBT people in Uganda. And this has been on cases, and it varies from being denied access to health services, being denied housing, also people being beaten off the streets. We've seen people losing their jobs because of who they are. And what also this law has created, it has created a sense of fear, because people are like watchdogs of each other, blackmail, because by the fact that someone says you are gay, then that puts your life at risk. And because sometimes you don't want anything, because they're pushing you into shame. So you find that people buy their way out. And this is what we have continuously said as advocates, as activists, that telling our policymakers and saying criminalizing the LGBT community, criminalizing us, puts lives at risk. And this is why we have advocated and continue to say we must be working towards policies that actually leave no one behind. Because when you do that, then there's no room for blackmailers. There's no room for people who violate other people's rights because of what they assume and presume you are. Again, this is what we've continuously said. And unfortunately, we find ourselves at a crossroad. But given all that, as a community, we don't give up. And we still believe in our constitution and still believe in our country because we know there is hope because our constitution is very clear and we just don't belong. We belong to the globe. But as Ugandans, this is our home. And this is why we continue to speak out. And this is why we continue to do the work that we do because we've never lost the hope, regardless of what the situation may look.
Wow, thank you for that. But the challenges keep mounting, and the global human rights struggle, especially surrounding health funding and health supports from global sources as well as from U.S., Canada, and the U.K. is continually at risk, as you know. Your organization works with LGBTQ people, sex workers, people living with HIV, and you face numerous challenges to do your work both safely and effectively. Talk a little bit about that, specifically what we're seeing and the impacts of the cuts to funding. How has that impacted people that you work with on an everyday basis?
Thank you so much, Andrea. And I'm so glad that we're talking about aid cuts right now and foreign aid, looking at significantly the US that with the current administration of President Trump, USAID was dismantled and a lot of aid stopped altogether. I must say, my organization, we had a program that was supported by a USAID that was looking at building livelihoods for the LGBT community to ensure that people have a source of income, create jobs, which would have been very significant in terms of just not only transforming their lives, but also creating jobs so that the economy, our community would thrive. I've dedicated my work and I've always spoken and said, if our community is in poverty, then they're always going to they're going to always remain vulnerable. Because if we advocate for a vulnerable community, then we're just continue doing the same thing over and over. And this is why investing in income generating was really important. And we had started to do some of that planning. We're looking at the work that was looking at life-saving, like emergency and rapid response, building the capacity of organizations that are members. But unfortunately, all this has gone. And the cuts, one of the things that I really want to say is that when governments or administration, like President Trump's administration, when they cut aid, for them, they look at it as a budget line. But to us, it's lives. It's actually the life-saving ARVs, the life-saving prevention, the life-saving care of our communities. So it's just not a budget line. Unfortunately, that hasn't really sunk in. And the most unfortunate bit is that there's been a lot of misrepresentation of what foreign aid was actually doing. Foreign aid, this was supporting communities to rebuild, to support communities, to live a dignifying life. So when all that is taken, organizations like mine and my community are left with limited or no resources to do the much needed work. And now we've been talking about ending HIV as a global health issue by 2030. But I must say that because of the decisions of the Trump administration pulling out, cutting aid, it's scrambled and held so many things. When we talk about the healthcare providers, there were healthcare providers who were supported by PEPFAR. But there was a moment whereby they had to sit home because they were the stop work orders. People would turn up at clinics, but there was no one to provide a service. And this is the true reality, And when we see all this, when they provided guidance, they called waivers, when it came to prevention, it was only being provided to breastfeeding mothers and pregnant women. Now you can imagine an LGBT person who was accessing PrEP could not access it. A sex worker could not access it, because it had been categorized. And these are all risks. And as we continue to see all this unfolding, it's very unfortunate. And it's also not true that governments, especially like mine or in the global south, were not looking at the sustainability plans or looking beyond paper. That's not true. Just, and we've been working with our government, with the support of UNAIDS, to build a sustainability roadmap that would help for transitioning. Our government would start taking on the bigger burden of investing in the healthcare, but also on HIV. But boom, just with a stroke of a pen, all that has now changed. Putting and placing healthcare under a crisis mode puts lives at risk. It does not solve anybody's problem. It doesn't save any lives. You may save as much billions as you can, lives will be lost. The gains that we had gained under the support and working with USAID and PEPFAR, I must say it is very hard. Right now, we may not see the impact, but in the coming few months, coming years, we're really going to see that we really took a huge turnaround and totally watered down the successes that we had gained and which was putting us on progress. So the whole conversation around cutting aid is putting lives at risk. But unfortunately, also people think it's just a budget line that has been struck out. It's lives like mine that are put at risk or that I put in danger.
And it's a budget line that is what is effectively a drop in the bucket for the US budget. And we know that many of these cuts, which are costing lives, as you've just talked about, are really earmarked to give tax cuts to the most wealthy individuals of the US, people who are billionaires, multimillionaires, and the last thing that they need is a tax cut, because the cost of that is, as you say, real lives. Lives are on the line. The future of health services, the future of HIV response is on the line. Now, you are doing lots of work behind the scenes. You are talking to people. You're trying to make up the gap. You are working. The people who do care about the future of human rights, the people who are still committed to global solidarity. How is that work going? What kind of stopgaps are being put in place? Is philanthropy making up the difference? Is it possible to make up the difference?
Oh, I wish. I feel like everyone right now is in crisis. Lots of things have happened, and we don't know the future of how funding is going to look like from the US or around the globe. Many governments, Canada cutting aid, UK, like everyone's cutting aid, and that also speaks volumes. Philanthropy, yes, could do something, but I think we need all hands on deck. And if we have some people pulling off, it means that those gaps can never be filled. And I think this is where the situation gets worse and worse. And this is why more dialogue needs to happen, and really for some partners to really step up to ensure that the much needed work that was being supported doesn't get to be washed away. So while philanthropies, private donors and all foundations and all are coming up, but again, you must understand that some of these foundations have also been getting support from government in order to channel the resources to communities like mine. And the fact that some of those pots are drying up, it means that there's actually no one going to be able to answer the call when we need them. And I think this is why governments need to rethink their support, but also working directly with communities so that we're able to ensure that the much needed support and care that our communities need is reaching them, but also really working with us in terms of building structures that focus on sustainability, but also self-reliance. And I think that's also a conversation that we need to look at. But also the most important thing is really how do we ensure that things or issues that put us to be vulnerable and also live in poverty or live in hardships are taken away. This is why we should be talking about decriminalization, so that communities like LGBT people are living freely and also building and contributing to the development of their society, so that they're able to get into the mainstream sector, so that they're employed. So again, these are things that we have to talk about. And unfortunately, at the moment, nobody is able to fill the gap. I think that discussion has been on, but I think now more than ever, we must be having that conversation moving forward.
Yeah, 100%. Because the policies that you're talking about, that put people in danger, the laws, the constant surveillance, the mob violence in the streets, all of this has been shaped by policies of evangelical and far right individuals who have spent decades investing in this, decades pouring into countries like Uganda, and lobbying and pushing for this, and they're the same people who are benefiting from these horrific cuts and these cuts to health services. Looking forward, how do you see this unfolding? What do you see when you look into the future with regard to these far right actors and their influence in Uganda, the rest of Africa, and the global South broadly? What do you see when you look into the future?
I think what I see in the future when it comes to the influence of the far right and how this impacts our lives and our communities is that every time they have a chance to have a leader who speaks to their policies, they actually do as much as damage as they can to ensure that they put many lives at risk. And I think Uganda is a very classical example where we have seen all these groups coming and injecting a lot of resources in the country, including the reason why we have even the Anti-Homosexuality Act 2.0 is because of the far right always trying to influence policies that they can't influence in their own home. Literally, we're at the crossroad of cultural war right now, where the far right are just trying to push and implement everything that they have failed to do in their home countries. And this is why we're seeing all these laws, but also this is why we're seeing the redefinition of who an LGBT person is. This is why we're seeing a lot of anti-trans sentiments rising and being pushed for with a lot of lies. Again, it's by purpose and by design. And let's also not forget it's the whole attack on sexual and reproductive health, because this is what they strive in, creating fear and panic. And I think what we've seen is every time they get a chance to feel like they have someone, let's say, in the White House who supports their agenda, then they run off and they do as much damage as possible. But I think as a country and as LGBT community in Uganda, we have been an example of knowing how to fight back. You know very well that the first law was pushed and was doing of American evangelicals. Somebody like Scott Lively, pastor from Springfield, Massachusetts, in the United States. But we were able to actually use the legal system in the US to actually hold them accountable. While on paper we may have not won the case, I think on so many accounts we did win because we did bring to light what it means when people transport hatred from their home country and come and bring it to a lovely country like Uganda. But also, I think most importantly, I would like to speak to the American people, to the Canadians, that please, 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 when you engage in church, when you're contributing that dollar towards missions in Africa, in Uganda, ask what that money is doing, because most of the time, that money is being used to propagate hatred and so many things that you don't believe in. And I think it's high time you started holding your own fellow citizens accountable, because now we're on the receiving end. And unfortunately, we may not have a voice like you do in your own country.
You took the next question right out of my mouth. What else can people do? That is absolutely important. People in Canada, solidarity efforts in Canada and the US and the UK and across Europe and anywhere people have privilege. What more can people do to lend solidarity? How can people continue to use their voice? Is there anything else tangible that listeners to this podcast should be doing?
Absolutely. And I must say, elections have got consequences. And without elaborating any further, I think my friends in Canada and Europe, in America, in the UK, Netherlands, Belgium, name it, all countries where liberties of LGBT people have been achieved, remember that we are at crossroads that could change in just a moment. And that could take an election to do so. So it's really, really important that we are careful, but also listening and pushing for justice for all, and pushing for governments and policies that leave no one behind, be it at home, but also abroad. We need to hold our leaders accountable. We'll do our part, but I think as citizens of your countries around the world, please hold your part, which is speaking truth to power and reminding them that what you cherish back home should be the same when it comes on the international scene, when it comes to the protection of our community. Because if you don't do so, then our lives will be put at risk or our lives are in danger. Also, what you have may not stay for long as you may think.
Absolutely. Freedoms, as we've seen over the past couple of years, can so easily be taken away. Human rights are very tenuous depending on who's in power. And as you say, elections have consequences. It matters what we do and what we say and how and who we support. This has been just an incredible conversation, Richard. I'm so honored to have had this time to speak with you. Your bravery and your leadership is so inspiring. And it's really important that Uganda is continuing to stay in the spotlight because Uganda's struggle is part of a larger global fight for truth, for justice, for human rights, and frankly, the right to live freely as you want to live, without state control, without state surveillance. It reminds us that the push for equality must be international, it must be intersectional, and it must be always deeply rooted in solidarity. We'll link to Richard's work and his organization and the ways that you can help in the show notes. And if you're listening from the global north, remember, ballot boxes matter, elections matter. Funding decisions matter. Where you support and the rhetoric that the politicians use that you support, it matters beyond your borders. Richard, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for the work that you do. And until next time, I'm Andrea Houston, and this has been Debunque It.